2 minutes past. We're going to make a start. So thank you, everybody, and welcome to the session today, Creating a Connected Campus with a Single Source of Truth with the University of Leeds. Just before we crack on, I'm going to start by outlining the agenda for today. Going to be covering this over about the next 50 to 55 minutes. So get yourself a drink, get yourself your lunch, and enjoy the session with myself and Chris. We'll start off with our welcome and intros. We'll go in through the journey that Leeds University have taken to get to their new intranet. Then the highlight of the session really, and it's something that we don't often get a chance to do, is to take a look behind the scenes. So Chris is actually going to do a live demo of their university intranet. So please look out for that section, and yeah, look forward to hearing Chris's thoughts and exploring what they've done there. Then how to bring your employees on the journey, making sure you think about that adoption and change management journey and continuing to measure the impact. You'll notice that the Q&A is at the end of the session, and you'll also be on mute throughout this. Please use the Q&A section in the top of your Teams bar, and also before we go into the intros, I'll just cover off the house rules for now. We'd like to encourage you to use the reactions throughout the session. So if I could just test that you're all there paying attention and you can actually use the reactions, please give me a thumbs up. Thank you very much. I can see them coming in now. Thank you very much, everybody. So if you see something you particularly enjoy or agree with, give it a thumbs up. If you love something that Chris says or I say, to give it the heart. Really like to try and make it an engaging session. As I said, you've got the Q&A on the top. We'll continue to monitor that as we go, and then we'll come back to the questions at the end. If you have any thoughts or comments about things that we're talking about, or you'd like to engage with other people on the session, please use the chat functionality. That should also be enabled for you. And yes, this session is being recorded. So if you do need to drop off for any reason throughout the session, we will be sharing a link for you to be able to watch back. And we hope to share that by the end of today. Okay, so start off with some intros. So myself, I'm Alex Graves. I'm going to be your host for today. My role at Silicon Reef is the Chief Visionary Officer. My role is to help people understand how they can use Microsoft 365 and the suite of tools that connect to it to create a great digital employee experience. And Chris, thank you for joining us today. I'll hand over to you for your intro.
Yes, thank you. My name is Chris Hewitt. I'm the Head of Internal Communications at the University of Leeds.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. We've got some more people joining in, which is great to see. So, Chris, let's set the scene of what we're here to do today. Tell us about your journey to get your new intranet, where you started, what the foundations were when you came in, and give us a little bit of a background about how you got to the goal that you're at today.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Hello, everyone. Yeah, a bit of history. So I joined the university 2.5 years ago. And it was transparent to me almost, well, even before I was appointed, that something needed to happen to the intranet. I even mentioned it in my interview, and it didn't cost me the job. As I've had some experience of implementing intranets before, that I'd be quite useful to them. And but as soon as I walked through the door of the university, essentially it was really immediately obvious we needed to sort out the intranet. Now, when I talk about intranet, it wasn't an intranet. It was a section on the corporate website on a content management system called Jadu, which was very unpopular, very clunky. And as you can see from the slide there, where it refers to Jadu sites, that's kind of 22 galaxies within the corporate website. And the staff part was just one of those galaxies. But actually the whole digital estate was just a massive sprawl that had just been allowed to grow and grow and grow. So we ended up at the time when we looked at the landscape with about 650 WordPress sites all over the place, SharePoint team sites all over the place. And there was starting to be a growing use of SharePoint communication sites. So there are two versions of SharePoint, if you're not familiar with those. Teams sites tend to be used by smaller groups for collaboration. Communication sites is what you use for sharing information to wider audiences, just generally speaking. the internet at the time, it was just really unattractive. It was really extremely limited in its functionality, and there was no two-way engagement that it allowed at the time. So we'd had some feedback from staff that they were unhappy with the digital estate, found it confusing and frustrated, couldn't find information very easily. So we had to do something about it.
So thinking, you said about your background experience with delivering intranets before, was that also in education, or was that in a private or public sector?
No, I first started, I was head of communication, internal communications for an agency called NHS Digital, which more recently got absorbed into NHS England. And I spent quite a bit of time on intranets at the time. It was really, when I first joined, it was really first generation kind of intranets. And I have to say that I did everything I could to avoid using SharePoint at that time. And it wasn't until I joined an organisation called Ofwat, which is the water regulator, then we started to look at SharePoint Modern, which was pretty new at the time. And it was really Alex who introduced me to SharePoint Modern, because I was pretty anti SharePoint, but it has transformed my view of SharePoint.
And I think that's just a view that I've heard so many times, Chris, of like the new world of SharePoint in the last 5 years has really evolved from, you know, the legacy that it was, and the naysayers are getting fewer and fewer. But coming forward and back to the University of Leeds and looking at this graphic, something that struck me with your starting point and your evolution here was that it seemed to me that people were already embracing like the Microsoft ecosystem. So the communication sites and the team sites that are on the left-hand side of this graphic, you already had 91 communication sites entering into the University of Leeds ecosystem. Obviously, that's nothing in comparison to your WordPress sites. Was it easy to make a choice for selecting Microsoft and your SharePoint as that place to start because of the growing interest?
Yeah, I mean, I spent years in battles with IT saying, I don't want to use SharePoint. And they were essentially saying, look, we're a Microsoft house. It makes sense to use SharePoint, really almost cost neutral, in fact, to bring it in, because I've already got the licensing for it. And so we had some fairly informal conversations with the chief information officer and said, look, we want to create an intranet. SharePoint we're already on it. We're already using it. But what we don't have is we don't have any structure or architecture or governance around it at all. And they realised that was going to be a really big benefit to the university if we could provide that through our internal communication functions rather than IT having to worry about it.
And when you spoke to the CIO, was it a relatively easy conversation because you were starting to shut down some external tools like Jadu and the WordPress sites and things and consolidating? Is it part of the strategy of the university to look at that consolidation?
Yeah, it is. Sometimes IT don't do themselves any favors because they allow things to evolve without too much governance around it. So essentially anyone could come forward and say, can I have a SharePoint communication site? And they would give them one. And that was it. There was very little training provided. And so there was this really organic kind of sort of bottom up kind of development. So it was really a very easy conversation to have with the chief information officer and the chief architect. I mean, they did insist that I then take the intranet proposals through the technical design authority, and I came under a lot more scrutiny at that point. There was a school of thought that we should be just using one content management system across the whole estate. You can understand where the advocates of that were coming from. There's a logic to it. But we were already Microsoft House. We'd already introduced SharePoint. It was already, the genie was out of the bottle. It was already evolving.
Yeah. So let's now think about how you kind of helped make it clear that working towards the business case. We're going to talk about the business case shortly, but I understand you did a staff survey to help you understand what the key pain points were that helped you in taking that forward, perhaps to the design authority. Can you tell us a bit about how you gathered the information to help you go into the design authority with enough confidence and background backed by some data?
Yeah. What we had was some evidence of user dissatisfaction. We knew as internal communication professionals what we were working with wasn't great, but we did need to provide a bit more evidence to get through a business case, and so the first point was just to get the university secretary who is in charge of communications here at Leeds was to get her on board to do a discovery phase. And during the discovery phase, we did questionnaires, we did workshops, focus groups. And these figures that are on the slide here are what came out of the discovery session. And even I was surprised at the figures we have here. And the killer fact was that only 24% of our staff thought that they could, or said that they could quickly and easily find resources, information they needed to do their job. I mean, I've never seen anything like that anywhere. I've worked across government and the NHS and the private sector. And then you can see that there's a massive gap between employees who thought it was quite important that they could find information to be able to do their job. So that we needed to do something about it. And in all the leadership discussions I had about developing an intranet, that's the only figure I needed to use. And I had a big 24 on that was the only slide I had, big 24 on there, and said, we've got to do something about this. Otherwise, we're just failing to support our staff.
So something that is the title of this actual webinar actually is about creating a single source of truth.
Yeah.
Now, one of the actual comments we had via somebody on LinkedIn was about that truth element. And do you think that the truth piece really plays into the fact that I find resources and information, I need to do my job? Is the truth related to me, helping me as an individual in a directorate, a function, or in a role, do my job? And what role do you think truth plays? How does that marry up with an intranet as a source?
Yeah, I mean, I think, truth is can be a bit of a strong word. Sometimes we just talk about single source of information for staff, but I think the truth bit is having an authoritative source of information, something that you can trust, and so as a concept, as an ethic, as a principle, people can resonate with it. It's hard to achieve though, because people think when you talk about a single source of truth, that's what they expect, and it has to be absolute. We'll just never achieve that at the university here, because there are other requirements for servicing information to different audiences, I suppose is the best way of putting it. So where we had some challenges was trying to convince service leads and content owners that it was important to be able to place information that staff needed in one place, because that's where that's what we'd hoped. Once we established an intranet, they would go. That would be their go-to place. And if they didn't find it on there, they'd think, oh, where do I go now? So we have looked very carefully at how we bridge to other platforms when necessary. Of course, where you do recognise that you've got an ecosystem of different platforms, there is a challenge with search, because you don't usually have a federated search that will look across all platforms. Whether that'll change in the future, I don't know. But essentially, we were hoping that if someone searched for something on the internet they thought that they needed to do their job, they should be able to find it.
Perfect. And I think let's take these stats forward into how you actually took that business case to get that leadership buy-in. So what were the things that you did? What were the activities you did to really bring those senior leaders on the journey to say, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and what challenges did you face in getting that alignment, particularly around IT, which you mentioned earlier on?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's I've already touched upon the stats that we arrived at through our focus groups and discovery. And that was really powerful, because at the end of the day, who can argue that you need to change your systems if people say they can't find information to do their jobs? I think one of the things actually was quite interesting. I went to a senior leadership meeting for those on the call who are from universities. This was the senior leadership team that works under the chief operating officer, so it covers a huge, important group of staff, professional services staff across the university. And I went to the meeting, said, we're going to build this intranet. These are the reasons why. I need your support in encouraging your services to be part of the intranet. And they were all very supportive. And I didn't know until after we launched the intranet that once I left that room, they all said, oh, this sounds a great idea, but it'll never happen. And that was something to do with the university's culture, that they weren't seeing change in systems happening very quickly. And it'd take years for something to move. So from that meeting to delivery, it was less than 6 months. And when I went back to that group after we launched, they actually confessed to me that they didn't think I could pull it off, but we did.
And I think we'll come back to that kind of the change journey. We'll come back to that later on about how you managed to bring other people with you on that change journey through communities. Yeah. We'll come back. But I think that was one of the key enablers. That was one of the things that helped you put your foot down on that accelerator and say, let's all do this together and let's go fast. And I think the way that you did that was by pulling people in around you. What challenges did you face from the IT departments and things like that in helping you go fast, perhaps? Was there things were there blockers in the way? Extra governance hoops that you had to jump through? What were the sort of things that were challenges that you faced along the way?
Well, obviously IT is quite a critical partner on a project like this. And the big challenge in engaging IT was that they've got some big priorities, and the intranet just wasn't high on their list of priorities. So essentially we had to say, you will have minimal involvement in this. You won't need to do a lot. They did want to have a close connection to it, so they assigned a solutions architect to work with us. They also assigned a business analyst as a condition for us moving forward, but we never really used the business analyst. It just wasn't necessary. They were quite. I actually took the intranet proposals through to the Technical Design Authority 4 times, but that was partly due to the way we were staging the whole process for the project. So we took the findings of the discovery phase to them. So, to really convince them that this was the right way forward in terms of the user experience for staff. And then we came back to them with the design. They were wanting to look at the architecture, how SharePoint works, and they were interested in permissions and how we control permissions and things like that. The biggest issue for us from the IT front, well, there's two things. One was a bit minor, and it's a bit we were able to develop workarounds. But the IT team, while we have an operations team working on 365 applications, they were quite open with us and saying they didn't feel as though they got the knowledge and the experience and skills to help us develop the intranet. So that's why we brought in technical expertise, which was you guys in Silicon Reef. And there's quite a bit that needs to be done at the back end to help set things up. Our IT guys didn't want to provide a third party with security clearance, so we had to find workarounds for that. It created extra work, and it took longer to do certain things, but we managed to work in partnership together. The bigger issue was providing really visible, making sure that the intranet had visibility and good access from a staff point of view, because we'd spent a lot of time developing it. We want, and we're trying to solve a problem of findability. The very first thing we needed to do was ensure, as a priority, that the intranet, people could find the intranet. Our expectation was that we would have all the browsers default settings set to the intranet. So when people click their browser, the intranet will be the first thing that came up. That caused a few issues because, from what we were told by the IT guys, there's a lot of users a lot of staff in the university who kind of set their browsers to have various tabs on them, and they would be disrupted as a result, and that would cause a lot of irritation, which wouldn't be good, and it'd be counterproductive. So essentially we had to do quite a big awareness campaign for the intranet to make people aware of where it is, how they can get on it, and we're now looking at using other means to get onto the intranet, like how staff can get access onto the internet through Teams using something called Viva Connections. So we're just at the early stages of making that happen, but it's not been ideal as far as I'm concerned in terms of access. So the earlier you can have, if you're in the process of looking at an intranet project, the earlier you can look at and start discussing access issues with IT, the better.
And I think one of the things that, just to recap on what you said there, was that this is a scenario we hear a lot from customers, that IT is stretched, they've already got their own priorities, the intranet and comms and engagement isn't really one of their priorities, but they also don't necessarily have the skills because they haven't built an intranet themselves before. They know operationally how to set it up, the structure and the permissions and how to keep the lights on effectively. It was really good to hear that you said it was just two people. I think you said a business analyst and a solutions architect. Two people got assigned to be consulted in the project, to be informed as well throughout the duration. But everything else, you were able to seek external help from us to help you get that done within the 6-month timeline and get it launched and live. And we're still evolving that now. So the key takeaway for me there is that as part of that business case and as part of that success is that the resource constraint internally doesn't necessarily have to be a blocker. You can open that blocker by keeping them informed, get a trusted partner involved who clearly communicates with IT to say, this is what we're doing, this is how we're going to do it, there will be sign-off stages along the way, let's bring them along the journey too. And like you said at the beginning, it was a rapid turnaround, and you managed to turn some people who are potential naysayers to believers that it could be done. So let's just move on to the overall vision, because I know that we did a lot of discovery work. We did a lot of understanding of where you are today, what the key drivers of making the intranet happen were through the discovery piece. How did you establish what the success criteria, the bigger picture and vision was going to look like? How did you involve bringing people on the journey with that?
Yeah, so this emerged through the discovery phase, and this is quite comprehensive and probably quite common set of objectives. I think the overall vision is that we wanted our employees to have fast and easy access to information, and they need to perform their job well. That was essentially it. You can see the components of that there. I mean, we also wanted, I think this is often overlooked with intranets, just making them appealing and attractive. There is sometimes a tension between the functionality and kind of task-based and the kind of transactional elements that you can talk that you can incorporate into an intranet. But ultimately, you want to really showcase the university, its community, and its culture, and you don't want your site to be really drab. And you want an engaging user experience. And I think that there were various things when we talk about, for example, that access to information, because there was a sprawl of information on lots of different sites that weren't really connected. It was very difficult for employees to have a continuous line of sight to strategic objectives for the university. And we found that through things like our employee engagement survey, that staff were losing faith in our ability to deliver our university strategy, our aspirations and ambitions. And I think the intranet has a role to play in this. So in coalescing that information, I think it was really important to have the overall benefits for the university really in mind. I mean, our university's got 10,000 employees, and we are a research-intensive university, so we've got a huge amount going on, and the breadth and the depth of what we do in the university is actually incredible. There's probably not one day goes by where I don't learn something new about what we're doing. But yeah, it's difficult to see that breadth and depth when things are scattered all over the place. So I think bringing it all together under one umbrella was again the right thing to do, and the benefits for that, I think, are relatively well understood without having to come up with loads of data analytics to justify it.
Yeah, understood. And in terms of that kind of that data analytics point, did you form some sort of like success criteria using these vision sections to say, like, we will know when we've kind of achieved our goal of improving the ability of people to find information faster? Did you use these vision points to help you to create a sort of reference point for the measuring the success of the intranet?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's first of all, you want people to use it. So you're looking at. I mean, to be honest, there wasn't a lot of. It was difficult to benchmark user experience, other than some of the high-level stats that we've already shared earlier today. But yeah, I mean, we have to ask staff, how are you finding it? Is it useful to you? Are you finding the information you need, you want to find? I mean, I was just. So one of the stats I'll give you, after the first 6 months. So we did a questionnaire in the discovery phase, so that gave us some benchmarking. And then 6 months after launch, we did a questionnaire again for staff, and we saw 154% increase in colleagues who found the intranet intuitive and easy to use. So that was encouraging.
Yeah, so again, like an engaging experience, easy, simple access, making sure they can access it and finding information. Fantastic that you found the benchmark criteria as well. And I think you're over 12 months now since your launch, and again we'll come to that later on. But doing those benchmarking studies, setting a baseline criteria, sometimes it can be overlooked to do a really good discovery and baseline understanding. But I do think it's one of the most important criteria that you can do, is to get a really good baseline understanding of where you are today, where you want to go with a set of vision kind of criteria, and mapping some metrics using data points to that to say, we'll know when we're on the right path and right direction, because we're going to survey every 6 months to get some feedback from people. Let's take these now. And Chris, I'm going to hand over to you to share your screen. So this is the moment that I think many of you have been waiting for, to actually see a live demo of somebody else's intranet, because it's not something that happens every day that you get to see this. So Chris, really appreciate you taking the opportunity to share the intranet here. And yeah, if we'll just allow that to load up. And so if you could share your screen, there we go. So I'll hand over to you to take us through.
Okay, well, I'm going to break this down into three key areas, which is structure, and then we're going to have a look at the home page. I'm going to talk about personalisation as well for the intranet. So just looking at the top row there along that banner, what we've got is this is the main menu, and each of the 6 or 7 tabs there are what we call hubs on SharePoint. So each hub is a collection of sites, but they have an association, they're kind of a family of sites that sit within those criteria. And then you can see that they have the drop down, which gives you an idea of what is in the hub. And the idea is that while there's a lot of content there, for example, it is relatively easy to browse to find what you might need. One thing that we've discovered is that sometimes, when we've looked at how users go about trying to find information, different users have different starting points, and we've looked at that. So sometimes along the menus, there is some duplication of links into different sites. I don't think that's a bad thing, even though it adds to the length of the menu. But essentially, it helps people to get off to a start, get off the ground, and find what they need. You can see along the title banner there that you've got following. So the default setting is not following. And what if you're following a site? It then gives you curated feeds, which you can find in the left rail here. So you can find, if I click on there, it will come up with all the sites I follow, and it actually provides a hierarchy of the sites I follow regularly. So this is an element of personalisation. So this can be different, will be different for every user in the organisation.
I think that's a really good top tip, because not many people use that. It's a really good top tip of how to add simple personalization using a native SharePoint feature. Follow those sites and it'll appear in your left rail there. Top tip number 1, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah. Just to keep onto the theme of personalization, we've got the My Favorite Links. So this is actually not out of the box SharePoint. It's a tool that Silicon Reef offered to us, and it allows you. I mean, previously what we had on our intranet was just a long list of quick links, and you might not use those quick links very often, but they will still appear on the home page. These are the links I've chosen. And behind this, you can go into the overall directory, and then you can just choose the ones you want to see. So you can see the usual favorite icons there, and then it will appear on your homepage. So that's been quite a useful addition, which has helped people to pin the applications and the links that they use very regularly to their homepage. We wanted the homepage to be a really, really vibrant. So to try and cover cut across that kind of richness of the university life and what's going on in the university. So here we've got a news web part here, which has various configurations. You've got various styles that you can use. And then lower down, where you've got particular activities going on across the university for a longer period of time, a news story, which can disappear off the homepage in 2 or 3 days. But if you've got something that's got longer duration, then you can place tiles on the homepage to give people a link through to key information in those areas. And you can use it for a bit of kind of promotional advertising. So we've got Climate Week happening on the campus this week.
And so these are kind of like your periodic campaigns to keep things fresh. And this is the section that you regularly update with new kind of themed content.
Yeah, that's right. And then we've got we have lots of opinions across the university. There's freedom of expression in universities. So we've got lots of very forthright views, but very interesting. Lots of expertise in the university. So opinions is a really important section for us. Again, you can see a different kind of carousel style there. You can change that to whatever suits your needs in your organisation. And different formats, like 15:1 is just a kind of short Q&A, and then you can pull through events that are happening as well there. But one thing that we've been quite keen to integrate right from the start of the intranet was Viva Engage. So these community forums are set up on Viva Engage, and you can see that the have your say element here allows, so every news story we post on the intranet, we then do a short post on the all company feed in Viva Engage, and people can comment on that. There's the various engagement there with likes and that sort of thing. But this is quite useful because we've had some challenges with two-way engagement and staff wanting to have a voice. So these forums allow that to happen, and it also brings in really nice community elements. So yeah, cats and dogs, it's a bit of fun and people engage with it. TipAdvisor is quite an interesting forum, because what we have in the university is we have staff from all over the world. And so we asked them, could you do a bit of we gave them a questionnaire about their country and asked them, where's the best places to go and visit in your country? What food should you, all those sort of things. So it was really bringing in some lighter elements of the community, which I think are really important.
And just a question on that, but prior to the launch of the intranet, where would things like that happen?
Well, it would have happened. There was some element of that happening, but it was very difficult to. It had very low visibility, to the point that before Viva Engage was Yammer before. We tried to discover how many people were actually using Yammer, and it was just very difficult to really understand the extent to which it was used. But it was just what had no visibility. So
I think it sounds to me like one of the things that you've done here by placing things like these links to these communities, as well as a single source of truth, it links back to that cultural piece that you talked about and how difficult it was to really pull together the culture that is the University of Leeds staff. And like you said, it's a global reach here, 10,000, but there's global reach here, creating a place where they can really have that entry point of how do they go and connect with other staff within the university to bring that cultural piece. So I know we're going to cover a little bit around bringing the employees on the journey piece very shortly. So let's park that one for now. But I think this is something that perhaps many people don't really consider as a part of an intranet, but because it's a Microsoft 365 ecosystem and everything is linked to each other within there, the added benefits of being able to feel part of that community and culture grow, connected to the intranet using Engage, is an absolute added benefit that I think it probably has its own metrics when it comes to staff retention as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Was there anything further you want to discover on here, Chris? If not, we'll move on.
No, I think that's fine.
Well, thank you very much. And again, I really appreciate the opportunity to see the intranet here. Like I said, it's not something that many people really get to see that often, a glimpse behind the scenes of what goes on inside the university, particularly with the intranet. So I'm just going to load up the presentation again as we progress. I know we're running about 18 minutes until the end of the hour, so just bear with me while I bring this up. Just a note while I wait for that to load, please do use the chat or the Q&A if you have any questions, particularly following the demo. If there's anything there you saw that you wanted to ask a little bit more about, please use that to ask some questions in there. So just a note to encourage you to do that. I can see a couple of you have just started to ask some questions now, so thank you very much for doing that. Let's move on to more about the adoption and change and bringing your staff and employees on the journey with you. So, Chris, how did you mentioned about Viva Engage and about the communities that are forming there across the university, cats and dogs. Every Viva Engage and Yammer community since existence has had a cats and dogs and cake community. But how did you go about bringing along your fellow comm staff and faculty staff along that journey with you throughout the process and rollout of the intranet?
I think the most important point to focus on really is the intranet is a collection of a huge amount of information from different services and activities right across the university. And your central internal communications team just hasn't got capacity to do this on its own. So while the internal communications team has overall responsibility for the intranet, we've actually got a network of about 200 content editors. Of those content editors, there are those who've got the responsibility of being site owners. And so right from very early on in the process, we had to identify who those site owners would be and then get them involved. So the starting point was to do an audit, who owns content on any kind of digital platform, and then create some data about what sites they look after and their level of interest in being part of the intranet. And actually, it was almost pushing an open door, because most of those existing site owners didn't like the technology, this content management systems they were using, and we're very keen to move into working with us on the intranet project. And so we very quickly developed this community of site owners who we were taking on the journey. So we were involving them throughout the process in terms of looking at the design, making sure that they got training, making sure they were getting guidance. Some of the site owners, for example, were looking at the opportunity to review their content and then rationalize their content and see what they wanted to migrate over onto the intranet. Some found that, particularly those with with large amounts of content and complex information, found that quite a daunting process. So where we needed to place particular resource and emphasis and support, we did. There was some, on the other spectrum, there were some elements where just migrating content could take a bit of time. But some of that content is actually quite easy, quite straightforward to move across. It's almost a cut and paste job, to be honest. So what we decided to do was train up a pool of students who would then take on some of the basic editing to help with that process. But throughout, it was giving the site owners real insight and real partnership into the whole development of the internet. And what that enabled us to do was, once we got through the design phase, which was essentially setting up templates and some standards that we wanted to apply to the intranet, the actual build was very quick. It was about 3 months in total. And there was Christmas in between. So anyone who works in the university knows the university pretty much closes down for best part of 2 weeks, Christmas. So it's because we developed that community that we were able to move at pace. So some of the community found that time frame difficult, and we did negotiate some extensions in the sense that we decided we're going to try and stick to our launch dates and not allow it to just keep extending deadlines for that. But we kind of then broke the development and the build down into different phases. So we'd say, right, you develop this for the launch and then carry on the development afterwards, which is a pragmatic way of going about it.
And I know that you used Viva Engage to build that community, who I believe have effectively came quite self-supporting, and it kind of grew that network of champions through Viva Engage. And I know that they were actually supporting each other with FAQs of how do you do this, how do you do that. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did for your 1-year anniversary of the intranet launch and the event that you actually held in the university?
Yeah, well, we've tried to maintain relationships with site owners, and so we've had regular forums where we meet in person and discuss, issues that are affecting their sites and development that we can take forward in the future. But we thought it'd be a nice thing when we got to the first year, which was the end of February, that we celebrate what we've achieved. So we had an awards ceremony. So we had 5 or 6 categories of awards, and we gave awards out to some of the best sites. And some of those awards were for those who particularly demonstrated compliance. Compliance is probably too strong a word, but they demonstrated the kind of core values that we wanted from an intranet site, and right through to more innovative sites that were using different web paths and were quite ambitious with their designs. So we had a cake as well, which was which went down very well. But it's just good, because I think that a lot of those site owners they're not leaders. Not many of them are leaders in their own services, but they felt really appreciated that together we'd achieved something that was actually quite significant for the university.
And I think the role of the site owner shouldn't be underestimated, because it's often the site owner that is the collector and creator and curator of content, which helps to signpost people to be more effective and productive in their jobs. It's such an important role. And I'll just link that to an actual question that we had in from Dawn Maguire, who said, would you recommend departments have their own SharePoint site that is separate from the homepage site? I think what Chris is explaining there is the fact that, yes, they have different departments and functions and directorates within the university that have a dedicated site owner. But the important part is that during the discovery piece, you do an architecture that allows all those hubs that, if you think about the demo that Chris just gave, that site navigation on the top, they could also be individual sites, but they are connected to the homepage via that navigation, but also content can roll up from those sites onto the homepage as well. So Dawn, just to answer your question, that the way that we often recommend this is that your SharePoint sites with their own dedicated owners have the ability to create content that rolls into that homepage of your SharePoint site. So I'll just address that question right there. Moving on to the impact and looking ahead, Chris, just tell us a little bit about what's been going on and what's the impact perhaps beyond the internal communications team that you've had. And we touched upon some unexpected benefits earlier. You talked about the communities of interest as well. Do you think that's an unexpected benefit, as well as obviously this this quote that we've had pulled out here?
Yeah, it absolutely is, because it's brought together a community of people who wouldn't normally work together and would probably never meet. So that's certainly been, and it's allowed for that openness and that sharing of knowledge, which I think is really important. Some of the other, I think that we were quite impressed with, you'd expect the internal communications team to be the kind of super users, but we were finding content editors in all sorts of different parts of the university were suddenly becoming really, really proficient. And we were proficient at the content management design. We were learning a bit from them as well, which was a good benefit for my team. I think those new partnerships, you can't knock them, really.
No, again, it goes back to that. Once you centralize the place where people enter into finding information, that source of truth, then great things can happen from there, as like launch pad and access to each other, information, content, and building community. So really the intranet is just not about a place where you have comms pushed out. It's a place that enables the culture of the organization to really shine through. And the story that you've told us there really kind of captures that. As we move into the last 5 minutes, let's just look at some of the Q&A. So I've answered Dawn's question, but also Chris, some of the key tips and takeaways that you've learned from delivering this intranet over the past 12 months. Could you just summarize that for us and think about that, perhaps what you would recommend to other people who are thinking about embarking on this journey?
I suppose, there's some of this that I've already covered, but just so in the interest of time, I think what I found with this project is really driving the momentum forward. So yes, it's a big job, but if you allow this to drift into, beyond a year, it starts to become weary, and people who are involved just wanting to crack on and see some evidence of delivery, really. And actually, when you do create that drive, it does create a bit of intensity, but people know they've got to get on with it, and that's what happened. And as I said, that build phase was about 3 months, but it's important to be pragmatic, provide some pressure valves. Where you're starting to see a bit of stress amongst other site owners, and we leaned into where we started to see that happening. We provided more support and resource to help them.
Did you find that the community of champions that you established, that stress and that strain that they were perhaps feeling, was, rather than it always coming back to you, was it also being handled by the other champions around them, but amongst that network?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent it was. Yeah. There are those who were starting from scratch. They didn't have a lot of knowledge of SharePoint, for example. Whereas there were some people who'd already used SharePoint. They might have worked on SharePoint Teams sites. So a bit of functionality there that they would have been familiar with. So there was different levels, and I think that's the fact that you had some people who already understood how to, do the basics and build a page. I think that helped others along the journey and actually gave them confidence that, it's easy to look at and think, right, internal comms should be doing this, is part of their job, this is part of their skill set. But actually, we had to develop our skill set with internal comms. So seeing it across a broader spectrum of people was really good, and I think that really helpful for the whole community.
And a question that came in from Rose regarding Viva Engage, and perhaps take it from the comms angle. Did you find it? Do you find it time consuming or challenging to manage the comments through Viva Engage? And do you need to provide moderation or monitor conversations that happen there?
We don't do hardly any moderation. We don't see any problems at all emerging from people misusing it. That's largely, I think, because people can't get away from it being named when they use it, when they comment on it. Where do you see lots of comments? It can be a bit of a challenge to try and get. It's not necessarily for the internal comms team to provide the response. It's for the business leads in those areas. And I think we've got some work to do on developing our culture around that. And at the moment, we're going through a mid-strategy refresh, and we've tried to get our leaders to post up provocative points on there, and we've seen some areas like AI that have kind of taken off a bit. So we don't actually find that it's time-consuming because we're not seeing a huge amount of comment on Viva Engage. If we were to start to see it, then we'd be starting to look at business areas taking responsibility for responding to it.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. Right, I think we'll draw it to a close. There's no further questions in there. Let me just double check the chat to see if there's anything coming in through there. No, I don't think there is. Okay, so well, thank you, Chris. I'd just like to take a moment to plug a session that we're running for higher education in particular, related to the art of the possible. So this is there's a link on this page, and we will be sending this out in the follow-up email. I've actually had some more questions come in just now, so I'll come to this in a second if I've got time. But yeah, there's a link here to be able to sign up and join an Art of the Possible session. So please feel free to click on that link. That link should be clickable right now if you wanted to go and have a look at that. Or drop me an email after this. So a question, have you repeated the same questions with staff now it's live to understand how much the intranet has improved their ability to find the information you need? You mentioned that earlier on, Chris, about a 6-month survey. Is that something you're continuing with?
The only reason why we do need to do another kind of survey or questionnaire, but we have a lot of surveys happening at the moment. And there's a bit of survey fatigue, so we have to choose our moment. Otherwise, the response is just going to be very low, and I'm not sure that would be particularly helpful.
Okay, understood. Thank you. And Dawn asked a question about any tips for effective search results. I'll take that one. So yes, effective search, the way that SharePoint search works. I would recommend that you look at things like adding in some refinements to the search results, but also giving people some education about how to search effectively. And if you are looking at using something like a Copilot that's coming in, how you structure and manage your data as well is also going to affect what results that brings back. My tip there for you, Dawn, who asked the question there is get some help and advice about how to manage the SharePoint content to really drive how SharePoint can give effective results back. So yeah, thank you very much. And again, it's just on the hour. So thank you very much for everybody attending. If you wanted to follow up with myself, Chris, or follow Silicon Reef, there's some links on the page there. But thank you again, Chris, for your time today and for taking us behind the scenes at the University of Leeds.